most people we find that have made the switch find themselves, not just 10% more productive, but, easily twice as productive. And you just get a lot more done more quickly. You benefit from the whole tooling ecosystem, simple things like statement completion in your editor, red squiggles if you make a mistake, hover for documentation, go to definition, right click, refactor into a function. Now you have classes. I mean, all the benefits of programming languages are now at your fingertips.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next installment of Azure Cloud Talk. I'm one of your co-hosts, Alec Harrison, here with co-host Brian Gorman and our special guest, Joe Duffy, founder and CEO of Pulumi. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, founder, CEO of Pulumi, I think historically it's looked like you've worked at Microsoft. Kind of what got you into tech? How did you, what does your path look like through the landscape of learning technology and doing what you love to do today?
Yeah, so I got started early, I think I was like 11 years old or something. My dad bought me the KNRC book, so my first programming language was C, which I'll tell you, the 11-year-old mind should not be trying to figure out how pointers work. I remember that just like baffled me, and it took me years to figure out how they work. But it was probably in hindsight a good thing to solidify early on. But then I actually started a consulting business when I was kind of in high school and got started. That actually planted the entrepreneurial seed for me that eventually turned into Pulumi, what I'm doing today. Worked at EMC, eventually worked at Microsoft for about 14 years on various things, but mostly developer platforms. So I got started early in the .NET framework, helped with C# programming language, ended up in Microsoft Research helping to build a research operating system at some point, which was a really fascinating project. And before I left, I was managing all the languages teams, developer tools strategy, significant chunk of Visual Studio. And I think my favorite thing I did at Microsoft the whole time was help take open source or take .NET to Linux and Mac cross-platform and also open source it. So my team was responsible for that. And then been on the Pulumi journey as the founder and CEO for a little over 7.5 years.
Man, just the things that you guys did to open up the ecosystem when you moved it to open source, that was the most brilliant thing that Microsoft has ever done, in my personal opinion. Like, to open that up to the whole developer world, I think it's changed everything, and it's amazing. So thank you for being part of that, because it's awesome.
Absolutely. And it was not my idea, but one day, I walked in and Scott Guthrie and Soma were kind of like, hey, we're going to open source .NET. And I was like, really? That's a surprise. But when we did it, I mean, it was a sea change completely. Like the whole culture, it was kind of crazy. It was like the entire team suddenly woke up and realized we were Windows only. That meant we weren't relevant to an entire segment of the world population of developers. And people just got really fired up about it. And so it was a huge, not just technical moment, but cultural as well.
It's really awesome, especially as somebody who develops only on a Mac, especially right now. Like, that wouldn't have been possible. Like, I had, you go back to some of the framework stuff if you had to do like legacy work, because Brian and I both do some consulting. Certain places you go into is like, hey, you have to have a PC because we're still on, a legacy .NET framework thing that literally you might be able to emulate it. You might be able to get it on there, but it's also like, it's not going to work this way it runs on a server if you're debugging an issue, like, and then you're going to have, all the fun stuff with emulation that pops up. So
and only if your Mac is an Intel chip, not an M1 chip or better, because it won't run out of framework.
Yeah, I did have that issue on one where I had to be on an Intel based Mac to get it to run correctly. So that was fun. But yeah, that's really awesome. I'm sure you saw a lot of crazy things with technology, just even culturally and technologically making it, hey, here's this massive thing we have to now basically open it up to more people and get more people on board. How do you even start trying to chew away at that of like, hey, we built it for this operating system, we built it for this technology, and now we're going to onboard all these other things? How do you even start with that without, running out of the room screaming, this is crazy, you're too big of a task?
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. Actually, one of the first things I did was I basically said, okay, half of the team are going to start working on a MacBook every single day. So they're going to feel how much of a gap exists. and feel the pain of like, hey, you can't even adopt .NET. You can't. I mean, people were running Visual Studio in parallels to try to get it, running, and like then they were going and using like the Xamarin Stack, and it just became instantly clear how much work we had to do, and people felt the pain, and they started trying to fix the pain. So that helped with the cultural side, and you'd think that you might have like mass riots on your hands, but people actually embraced it and had fun with it. I got a little lucky because at that time I had just reorged a team from Windows that was building. Basically, we were incubating what we called this thing System C#, which was what if you could rewrite all of Windows in C#. You get type safety, memory safety, garbage collection, and we had just incubated a project called Midori, which was a new operating system that had basically developed a lot of the technologies that went into that. But after a few years, I decided it doesn't make sense to do programming language work within Windows. That belongs in the developer division. And so I orchestrated this reorg, and I ended up over there. But what it meant is I had a bunch of people now that knew how to build operating system runtimes. And they formed the core of this new team that had to take the common language runtime, which is underneath all of .NET, and get it to work on Linux and Mac, and basically create a platform abstraction layer so that most of .NET didn't have to change, but the CLR itself could sort of insulate the framework a little bit from that. It's not entirely true. It's like actually surprising how many Win32isms permeate the .NET framework. If you think about, wait handles and thread pools and all these things. So it wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to get started.
Nice. So how does that relate to then what you're doing at Pulumi with making a cross-platform infrastructure as code tool?
Great. I'm surprised you drew that link because a lot of people don't draw that correlation, but I don't know, once you've built one multi-language runtime, I guess you're destined to just rebuild them until the end of time, right? Like I worked on COM, I worked on, what was it even called? Like the version of COM that was like in Windows 10, .NET. So there's a lot of lessons learned that you can apply in terms of, what is language specific versus what is a runtime construct that can be common across all the languages. And I think with Pulumi, it was actually, when we got started, it wasn't even infrastructure as code for us. It was, we wanted to make cloud applications a lot easier to build. And what we found was we were still operating in a world of silos. You had developers over here who ignored the cloud. You had infrastructure people over here who, by and large, were copy and pasting scripts and domain-specific languages. And so our idea was, let's let them use general purpose languages to program the cloud, but which language? We actually explored, build our own language, and then realized, okay, when we were designing the floating point syntax, the world doesn't need another language just for programming the cloud. Instead, if we come up with this multi-language abstraction, the infrastructure as code engine, we could let people bring any language. And it wasn't easy. It took many years to figure that out. Like at one point, we had a fork of V8, the Chrome JavaScript engine. But we eventually figured out what that interface should be.
That's awesome.
So you're tackling big problems, changing that, abstracting it. Wrong to say, making people's lives just kind of generally better and easier. How did you come up with I think you said that like you didn't necessarily come up with the idea of open sourcing .NET, but how did you come up with the idea of like, hey, all of these clouds, like this product of, hey, if I want to be in Azure, that's cool, but as soon as I need to move to AWS, that's a pain. Or, if I'm trying to learning all these DSLs, time of training up your people, or just being able to have that talent, like maybe your area isn't big in Azure or big into, whatever cloud you're trying to get to. What kind of was the culmination or light bulb moment for you that kind of was like, this is something that we should move to or help solve?
I think it started with naive, how naive I was with respect to cloud development, because I came from a world of developer tools, right? I was working with great programming languages and IDEs, and I took for granted that you've got great test frameworks and package managers, and you can refactor code and all these things. And then, I actually worked with Docker to do some joint launch with Azure back very early on when I was still at Microsoft. And that got me looking at Docker a little bit more. And then I started reading about Borg and Omega out of Google, the precursor to Kubernetes, and I started getting really excited about the coming age of distributed computing is finally here. I worked a lot on concurrency in the 2000s, and yet when you go look at the best in class tools, it was like piles upon piles of YAML that people are copy and pasting. The best solution is a domain specific language, and we used to have this saying at Microsoft in the languages community, every domain specific language is destined to grow up to be a poorly designed general purpose language, because you start out thinking it's simple, and then you meet the real world, and then you have to add all these like weird for loops and weird if statements. You end up with something that looks like a general purpose language. It's just not, you didn't think in advance that that's where you were going to go. So we said, hey, that's crazy. Let's stand on the shoulders of giants. Let's benefit from decades of great developer tooling and developer languages, and let's not go recreate an entire separate silo that's just for cloud infrastructure. We'll let you bring your favorite language and get all the benefits. Like you were saying, lower the barrier to entry. If you know Python, you can program in the cloud. It's flexible, it scales. There are a lot of benefits to that. And now what we find is it just opens the door to a whole different class of end user who can now just get up and running in the cloud. If you're a developer, you can program in the cloud. It's just like programming the operating system.
That's great. I was just thinking like, so if I take Pulumi, basically I can write in C# or in JavaScript or Java, my language of choice, or basically orchestrate an infrastructure deployment into Azure or Amazon, correct? That's all. That's all right. Okay. Right. So how much do I need to know about the cloud prior to using the tools? Like if I'm going to do a Kubernetes cluster or even a simple thing like an app service or an EC2 or whatever, depending on what cloud you're in, right? Whatever you're trying to do, how much do you need to know all that stuff first, or can Pulumi help me learn that as I'm building the tools?
Yeah, Pulumi definitely helps you learn that. The way to think of it is the cloud suddenly becomes APIs. So it's sort of like how you interface with like Windows services or operating system services. And we have a lot of getting started guides and tutorials, and we have templates you can start from. So if you just know like, hey, I just want a microservice on AWS, but I don't want to go deep in, is it Fargate, is it ECS, is it Kubernetes, this thing or that, it's very simple. We also have AI assistants that you basically say in natural language, I want a Kubernetes cluster with a CDN in front of it and a MySQL database. It will just spin that up for you and give you the code.
That's awesome. And you're literally going to save hours of work doing that.
Even sometimes days or weeks. We've heard people that like, man, this used to take me weeks and I get it done in like an hour.
Yeah. Don't tell my boss.
Right. Well, then you can go on vacation for the rest of the,
I got a golf game this afternoon, but I'm actually working on that Kubernetes cluster, boss. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Love it.
So how have you seen, so I played with your guys' AI tool. It was really neat. How have you seen like AI adoption? I think there's what you hear about the industry trends, but like Pulumi specific, if you want to touch on, like, I assume you guys kind of see a little bit of both of that, right? Because, hey, Pulumi, you're in my cloud, and that's where a lot of this innovation's coming, but also then you guys have an AI assistant. How are you seeing that going?
Yeah, you're totally right. It is sort of two things for us. One, when I hear AI, I think infinite compute, infinite data. So the infrastructure requirements for AI workloads are pretty extreme. And so actually Pulumi's approach, because it's, you have a language, it's easier to operate at that level of scale. I had a customer, I hopped on a call with them and said, they were like, we're trying to do this with Terraform, but we're hitting a wall because what we're trying to do is spin up dozens of Kubernetes clusters with hundreds of GPUs on them, and we quickly overflow what fits in a single Azure account. So what we really need to do is first provision dozens of Azure accounts, and then in each one, provision dozens of Kubernetes clusters with GPUs. And I'm like, I think you just described something that costs like $20 million or something. But with Pulumi, you got for loops, right? You can just write some Python. And so that's driving a lot of the adoption. Like OpenAI is a customer, X.AI, NVIDIA, lots of AI companies. But then on the flip side is applying AI to the domain of infrastructure management. And so I mentioned our coding assistant. That's one where we've sort of taught the AI about all the cloud infrastructure in Azure and AWS and how to configure it. But we've also introduced a co-pilot, so you can ask it literally anything. You say, what's running at IP address 1234? What versions of Kubernetes do I have in my Azure accounts? What's my least used, most expensive resource? Stuff like that. And in the future, we're moving in the direction of having agents that can basically be virtual DevOps assistants that help you get stuff done.
That's really interesting because no, not bashing on Azure too much, but sometimes cost management is a huge pain point I hear from people of like, what's costing money? What am I spending? Tell me how my cost breakdown is, especially if you've ever worked with the startups and like Microsoft startup program, like that's a different portal and it comes out in an Excel spreadsheet. So I think that's really neat that you can literally ask Pulumi like, hey, tell me what my least used most cost is, or FinOps was huge. Maybe it still is. I don't hear it as much in the speaker scene, but how do you maximize your cloud usage but minimize the cost? So just being able to ask a model that sounds like a really cool and innovative thing to just say like, hey, you don't now need an Azure expert who can count, everything to see the exact metrics or make sure you have logging set up exactly perfectly. You can now just say, hey, where am I maybe misusing stuff? And having somebody point to you or an assistant that can just say, hey, go look at this.
Yep.
That's super cool.
Yeah, it's getting more, it's getting better over time. These things aren't perfect, but the interesting thing about cost is it doesn't need to be perfect to be useful. Like there are some domains where you need it to be perfect. Like if you're going to have the AI actually go like manipulate your cloud infrastructure for you, you probably want it to be close to perfect. But if all you want to do is identify where I might save money, and that query that I mentioned, that's the first query I thought to ask it when we first prototyped it. And I found $5,000 of savings within like just a few minutes. And I was like, all right, I think we're onto something.
And $5,000 a month, I assume, of savings?
It might have been annual, but yeah, it was recurring. It was like we had some RDS database that had been sitting there unused for like multiple years and nobody knew.
That's a real common use case. We've even started at the client I'm at doing, we call them like Azure health checks of where we'll come in and evaluate, see if you've right-sized things. And I think the first couple we've done, it's been something like $5,000 to $10,000 a month for some of these. And we've done some automation around it, but it's crazy to think that like if you use a tool like this, you could just ask in natural language, hey, where are you seeing cost savings? What am I doing wrong? I guess so you guys are kind of on top of multiple platforms. Do the development of things like Copilot for security or the security Copilot, I forget what exactly Microsoft's calling it, is that influencing kind of the features you're putting into your platform? Or because you're kind of overlapping multiple clouds, are you still going to be like going in those different routes? Because like I haven't heard a similar announcement from like Amazon or Google. How does that influence kind of the product vision?
Yeah, that's one of the great things because, we started with infrastructure as code and we had to build out support for, we support hundreds of providers, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Kubernetes, Oracle Cloud, but also folks you might not think of like Cloudflare, Snowflake, Datadog, MongoDB, also vSphere, so for on-prem things. So everything I'm mentioning, we sort of have this common object model over all of these cloud providers and a common metadata model. So then we can teach the AI about that common model, and that's how we get, broad cloud support across all of these cloud providers. So when we add support for teaching the AI about, let's say, cost, broadly speaking, it works across all the cloud providers, right away. Sometimes we have to go deep and teach it on specific things like how do you find the pricing list? What about if I have a private EDP with Microsoft, like how do I find the actual cost? So there are domains like compliance is another where we have to sort of go out of our way to teach it. Here's what high trust is. Here's what PCI DSS is. But our roadmap is pretty much cloud agnostic, and anytime we ship a feature, it generally is supported across all the clouds.
That's awesome. So like a single feature from a specific cloud, you guys are, when you tackle something, you're not saying, all right, tomorrow we're going to support, cost management for AWS. And then like 3 months, it's going to be GCP, and 3 months, it's going to be Oracle Cloud. It's the way you guys are architected. If a feature comes out, it's going to support the vast majority, not just, like you would in another cloud provider, right? You're just waiting for them to get to you.
Yep. Yeah. And we're partners with all the clouds, and we've worked with them to make sure that when they ship a new feature, we have support for it on day one. So, the same way that Azure auto-generates a lot of their Azure SDKs off the open API specs that are public open source, we generate our Azure provider off of that. So if Cosmos DB ships some new whiz-bang feature, and they announce it at build, Pulumi supports it that same day, including surfacing it into the AI, but also from infrastructure as code.
Awesome. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit in the pre-recording, but what's your kind of take right now on AI? Do you think we're going to see the impact that everybody's promising? Are we? You talked about an AI DevOps assistant. Should DevOps people be worried about their jobs? Kind of like, what are you seeing as kind of your role right now?
Yeah, definitely should not be worried about their jobs. I think of the AI as really making all of us more productive and doing more with less. I think the common story I hear from our customers is infrastructure platform teams and DevOps teams are already feeling like they're behind, and that they often become the bottleneck, and they don't want to be the bottleneck, right? And so developer self-service is one way that a lot of teams are trying to not be the bottleneck anymore, like let developers spin up cloud infrastructure with guardrails. But AI is also another where it's very common for our customers to say, hey, basically we've shaved off 1 to 2 days of low value, heavy lift work that we would have had to do, every week, thanks to AI. And I think we've focused, to me, the litmus test for AI that I always challenge the team on is it genuinely helpful? I don't want to do demoware, vaporware. I don't want to AI wash stuff just because we can. Like, focus on adding value. And actually, one of the most useful killer features we've done recently is if you hit an error in the cloud, oftentimes you get this like really obscure error message. You end up like Googling it for hours. And you're like, oh my God, I can't find, you end up on Stack Overflow and you don't actually get the answer. Well, we added an auto-diagnose capability that uses LLM. So if something fails, we'll use the AI to suggest to you what the solution might be. Almost every one of our users is using that and loving it, and because it's helpful.
That's great, because I can't tell you how many hours. I'm an Azure guy. I deployed a container on Fargate for something else, and everything looked like it was running. If I turned off the health checks, everything was fine, but it was because I think it's because I didn't configure the port right in CDK so that it was exposing the right port. So then like all the services looked like it was running, but the health check failed. So it just kept spinning it up, throwing it down, spinning it up, throwing it down. I'm like, I can get through the VNet. Like everything should be working. Like the VPC, I see traffic coming in, going out. Like, what is going on? And it was just like one YAML change, or I think it's TypeScript now, but it still looks very YAML-y. It was just like one line I needed, and no Google helped me. No anything I could find helped me. Is like, look at this. I'm like, that's there. So an auto-diagnose feature is huge, I think, just from hey, go try this, even like starting you, even if it's not correct 100% of the time, to your point earlier, if it gets me thinking in the right way or pointing me in the right direction, cuts off a ton of time that I would just be otherwise sitting here staring at a screen or begging somebody on Stack Overflow had the same issue.
What does this JSON error even mean? It doesn't make any sense to me right now.
Yes. That exact scenario, by the way, the reachability is one that I've tried too, because it frustrates me when I set up a VPC. I think I've got the security group all correct, and then I go to hit the server and it's like, it just hangs, no reachability. So it's one of the first things I asked it, and then it figured it out. It's like, hey, you're missing this setting over here, our Copilot. But these are read-only scenarios. We have experimented with read-write scenarios as well, which starts to get into slightly terrifying territory, but also very exciting.
I
So
would
I
be
actually
concerned about cost in that scenario. Like, what's it going to do to fix it?
Exactly. So, but I did ask it to fix it, and it did fix it. And my mind was blown when that happened, to be honest.
That's awesome. I was just say, so if I'm a typical bicep or arm or even Terraform user, what's my motivation? Like, what would be the reason I would start looking at Pulumi, and how do I sell it to my boss, like as a better alternative?
I think it begins with the end user experience. I think most people we find that have made the switch find themselves, not just 10% more productive, but easily twice as productive, and you just get a lot more done more quickly. You benefit from the whole tooling ecosystem. Simple things like statement completion in your editor, red squiggles if you make a mistake, hover for documentation, go to definition, right click, refactor into a function. Now you have classes. I mean, all the benefits of programming languages are now at your fingertips. And so it adds up to a whole lot more productivity. I think it also lowers the barrier to entry for other people to contribute. So a lot of folks we talk to are, infrastructure platform team that's trying to empower developers. And it's not that developers are going to become experts on operating VPCs and Kubernetes clusters, but if they want to spin up a container registry, database, pub subtopic, now they can do that, and it's more familiar to them, and they can have the guardrails. And so what we find is even with Terraform, developers are generally capable of learning HCL. They just don't want to.
Right.
And so in teams like that want to build a bridge to developers, they find that the bridge just never organically happens, right? So they're always trying to push a boulder uphill, and with Pulumi, it just organically happens. And so typically for the VP of engineering, you've got total visibility, total control, everything's automated, your developers are productive, so the business is happy. And increasingly, we're building security into the platform as well. We have a couple new products there. So that's kind of the summary.
Okay. And so what I've heard, is I personally have not used Pulumi, but I know a lot of people who have, that you can do one of two options. You can either store your Pulumi infrastructure code with Pulumi, or you can do it on your own. Is that accurate? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so Pulumi is open source. We're Apache licensed. We stand behind the open source. Community is everything to us. We do a ton of things, in the community. We have user groups. So you can go 100% open source, manage your own state. But we have this thing called Pulumi Cloud that you can use. It's meant to be just a lot easier. So it's easy to collaborate. It's automatically secure, automatically reliable. The analogy I draw sometimes is Git and GitHub.
Okay.
You could host your own repos with Git if you want, but it's a lot easier with GitHub, like to share and collaborate with pull requests and things like that.
Yeah. So you've eliminated some of the pain of all of that by giving the Pulumi Cloud an option.
That's right.
And I mean, I'm assuming it's a no-brainer that I can trust that my infrastructure code is safe in the Pulumi Cloud.
Yeah. We have over 3,000 customers, some big names like NVIDIA and other Fortune 500 customers. So you can trust us. We also have SOC 2 Type 2, AWS partner certified. So we have a lot of assurances there. We also have an interesting architecture from a security standpoint where you don't actually give Pulumi your cloud credentials if you don't want to. So we can't actually even get to your cloud account. That's always private to you behind your firewall. And so some of those decisions, I think, have made it easier for enterprises to pick up Pulumi.
Yeah, that's a big selling point. What you just said there, you're basically saying, yeah, you're using our cloud, but your stuff is isolated or basically unreachable in a way that if Pulumi somehow got compromised, it doesn't matter. It matters, but it doesn't matter to the security of our integrity of our code base.
That's right.
For the infrastructure side of things.
For the infrastructure. Yeah.
I don't have to go to my shareholders and say that, because we use whatever. That's cool. I think one thing I'm curious about. So when I first learned about Pulumi, and I don't mean this derogatory, but it was just infrastructure as tool company. And then I keep seeing all these announcements that you guys are doing with Pulumi Cloud. You hinted at some security features, AI. kind of what is the kind of vision you have of Pulumi moving forward from, it was like, oh, this is just an infrastructure equivalent or alternative. Now you guys have like so much more. What's kind of like the direction you guys are going there?
Yeah, so we really just want to make adopting the cloud in the most productive, secure, and seamless way possible for the entire organization. We start with the infrastructure platform team because that's typically the center of everything. But we want to make the infrastructure platform team successful in building bridges to developers and giving productive developer experiences, make sure that they've got the right guardrails in place so that it's secure and compliant, even as developers are spinning up new services. And we want to make the head of infrastructure the hero with the CISO, make sure everything is secure by default. And I think our customers tend to be those who think of the cloud as not just an afterthought, but sort of central to what they're trying to do as an organization. Maybe it's because, they're Snowflake and they're actually sort of a cloud themselves, or, they're a bank and everything's moving to the cloud for, consumer services. And so it's more of a strategic kind of engagement. But yeah, we introduced a secrets manager this last year because we see a lot of people struggling with secrets. And we added this new capabilities called Pulumi Insights, where you can point us at all of your cloud accounts, even if it's not managed by Pulumi infrastructure as code. And we'll give you the total asset inventory. You get Copilot over it. You can search over it. Because we found a lot of people struggling with, what do I even have in the cloud? And how do I migrate it to IAC? So that's exciting as well.
Yeah, that's
really
huge.
cool.
You could just literally do an audit on your system, even if you didn't even use Pulumi. You could say, "This is what we have." That's amazing in itself, right there.
Yeah, and it'll tell you, is any of it managed by Pulumi? Maybe 10%. Maybe you got 5% with Terraform over here. Maybe you got 20% of ARM over here, and then 60% is unmanaged. And we have migration tools built in, so you can just say, "Hey, generate the Pulumi IAC for this resource over here." It's a problem a lot of people struggle with.
I also like the part that you talked about of security by default. I know Microsoft has talked about that, but there's a lot of ways you can get around that, or like ClickOps makes it, or VS Deploy makes it easy to maybe not be the most secure. I think that's a really cool thing from your tool. You look at this as a holistic adoption of, if I'm not in the cloud yet, which some companies are not, like, haven't taken the leap. Like, hey, we have a system to help you orchestrate everything, inventory everything, and be secure by design. Like that seems really cool and huge, because it's like, okay, no matter how my engineers, maybe I accidentally give them too much permissions, maybe they, have a role they shouldn't, I can still now inventory this, see that it's insecure, or see that, they maybe deployed it manually. I'm going to go clean that up. I'm going to go lock it down. So you also have then the security people kind of satisfied there as well, of, this is the sandbox we're all in, to hopefully cut down on, we talked about earlier, of having to tell shareholders, or, put out that press release of, hey, we were compromised, or, insert the latest company name here, right? Of, I think the US government was the most recent one of everybody's social security numbers being leaked. But yeah, that's really cool and awesome that you can help shepherd people through that journey. So I think that's a big concern people have, right? Of, here is my wall. And I hear this with AI a little bit too, right? Of, why would I use this off the shelf, this model that could be doing something? I want it, in my walls, in my server room, locked behind a door. So I think that's really cool, and a really neat vision of helping people get there, instead of just potentially having them do it incorrectly and be exposed that they don't even know.
Right. And it's interesting. I was sort of, formative experience for me was in the 2000s. I don't know if you remember, like, the blaster worm and viruses. And like back then, Bill Gates launched this trustworthy computing initiative thing. And I actually helped with some of the, putting in place more secure developer tooling practices at Microsoft. And the thing that we were we were using C and C++. And so we had like use after freeze and uninitialized variables and all these sorts of areas that would lead to sources of compromise. And we're finding these things after the fact. And so what we did over time is we integrated that closer into the development lifecycle. So we're we're not finding them when it was too late. We were using static analysis and more safe programming techniques to ensure that they didn't happen in the first place. Like by construction, it was secure. And I see a similar analogy in the cloud where we're shipping insecure configurations and then finding them when it's too late. Like you don't want to have to write that shareholder memo, right? let's block things before it's too late. And that's what we're trying to do, bring security closer to the actual development of the cloud software itself.
So can I say I need to implement FERPA or HIPAA or something, and I can use the Pulumi tool to audit, and it can say, you didn't, encrypt your storage accounts, so you've got a big problem here, and like give me that same list that I see maybe from an Azure advisor, but then also have like push this button to remediate it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome.
Yeah, so we have a policy as code that can gate your infrastructure as code deployments, or in this new mode I mentioned where we'll discover your resources, it can run against those as well. So we have policies for lots of different compliance frameworks that can check those things. The AI also sort of can play a role if you want to be a little more ad hoc, asking interactive questions. But then, yeah, we have remediations as well. So you can either have it auto apply during your infrastructure's codes, like auto tag resources, stuff like that. Or if you want to point and click a button because it's like catastrophic and you just found it and you want to fix it before you can even find your IAC, or maybe it was click ops, then yeah, you can click a button and say, hey, remediate this. Of course, we don't have like every single check you might imagine in the world. So we do have the ability to write your own policies as well. So it's extensible if you want to write your own.
That's awesome.
I think that's really cool as far as just like helping people do stuff safely, because it's like the two-pronged approach, right? You want to make it easier for people, but you also don't want people like Brian was talking about. And I think we've all gotten this story in the cloud of where I spent too much money. I've done something, hopefully not made things insecure, and I'm the reason that breach happened, right? So it's like make it easy, but also make it safe. I think those are two cool pillars that I'm kind of hearing here.
Well, just part of it is you just don't know what you don't know sometimes.
Yeah.
If you have a tool that can help identify what you don't know, that's amazing.
Right. I don't have to go hire, I don't even know what the title would be. Yeah. A Microsoft MVP MCT trainer to come say, is my Azure infrastructure safe? And then pay Brian an hourly rate for a month and a half to go manually audit all configurations.
But now I can use Pulumi and do it in half the time, less than half the time.
Yeah.
But don't tell my clients that. Wait a minute.
And also, exactly what you're saying. Like, it's not, especially this comes in, especially with developer self-service, right? Like platform teams want to give developers the ability to move faster because they don't want to be at the other end of a ticket and, slowing the business down. And yet developers most developers are not malicious. They're not going to try to do the wrong thing. They just don't know that they're doing the wrong thing. So now the central platform team can put in place the guardrails, the policies. Now developers go spin up infrastructure and the platform team knows that those policies are being enforced. And that's pretty important to achieving the developer self-service goals a lot of folks have.
Okay, so that led me to another question. So let's say I am a team and I have like this massive catalog of Terraform that we've built over 5 years, and can I integrate that into the Pulumi policies, or does it have to be rewritten in Pulumi?
So you can, all the the insights thing where you point us at your cloud accounts, you get the policy checks, you get remediations. We don't care how it's provisioned, so it could be Terraform, it could be ClickOps. But if you do want to gate deployments and actually do the automation through Pulumi Cloud, you need to somehow get the HCL code over to Pulumi. We have ways to coexist. So if you want to say, hey, there's a VPC provisioned over in that Terraform workspace, just take the ID and consume it from a Pulumi program so it can reference the Terraform. You can do that.
So I can do a migration, like bring some in, bring some in, bring some in.
Incremental, yeah. Cool. And we do have tools to do that. So we have the ability to convert HCL to whatever Pulumi language you want.
That's awesome.
But it is hard to, you can't boil the ocean overnight. And so most
Right.
folks will do it incrementally. We do, by the way, we do have a team of, I call them the Terraform busters, like the Ghostbusters. They come in and just get rid of all your Terraform for you. So we have a professional services team that's all they do all day, every day.
Do they have uniforms, and can I buy one?
They do not. That is
Oh.
a fantastic idea.
I want one, and I want to wear it to a conference. I'm a Terraform buster. I'll even write a song. I'll steal it from Huey Lewis. Sorry.
I love it. We actually got in trouble at reInvent for dressing up. We had a mascot. Our mascot's a platypus, a purple platypus.
Okay.
And we have a guy on the team. He's been with us for 7 years. For his 7-year anniversary, we got him a full bodysuit of a purple platypus. And he came to reInvent and he wore it. And security actually yelled at him, said, "You're not allowed to dress up like a purple platypus." So I wonder, maybe the Terraform busters would be acceptable.
Yeah, as long as you can see their face, right? It's about a mask thing, maybe.
That's probably what it was. Yeah,
like a malicious intent. I don't know.
Show me the rule that specifically says the purple platypus is not
that's
allowed.
Just like I mean, I did not have on my bingo card purple platypus is not allowed at reInvent for 2024.
Pro tip for anybody that was considering showing up as a purple platypus, I strongly discourage you.
Yeah,
Well,
green maybe, purple not so much.
seen
Could have been the color.
Yeah.
Or,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
purple unicorn maybe would have been okay. Oh, that's awesome. I think we kind of wrapping down a little bit of a different thing. I've heard that you have the honor of being notoriously productive. Do you have any tips of, sometimes I feel like Brian and I talk about this tech, you're sometimes drinking through the fire hose. How do you stay learned enough that you can continue to be productive, or how do you focus on learning versus what you need to get done today? Like how do you manage all that to continue to do that and get the mantra of being notoriously productive?
You're not the first person to ask me this, and I was not aware that I had a reputation here, but a teammate asked me this, and I actually wrote an article, and I never published it, and maybe I should, but I don't know. I think for me, it's about finding joy in what you're doing. Like if you're enjoying what you're doing, I think you naturally will just do more of it. And I truly do enjoy what I do. So I think first and foremost, that's got to be a prerequisite. I think I would find it very difficult to work as hard as I do if I didn't really enjoy it. I like to mix big things with small things. Like it's easy to get stuck working on a big thing for a very long period of time. I like the dopamine hit of like a quick win, right? Whether that's answering a customer's question or just cranking out a blog post. And sometimes I gamify it. I'm like, all right, I'm going to crank out a blog post, but I only have an hour and it must get done in that hour. Just say hyper focus and just get it done. Doesn't have to be perfect. I think that's also like, perfect can sometimes be the enemy of good. So knowing when to stop and move on to the next thing, I think is also important. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot about what I'm going to do before I do it as well. So like usually if I'm writing a blog post, I pretty much constructed the blog post in my head, just, in the shower, going for walks, sometimes in my dreams, to be honest, which I'm not sure is healthy, but that's just some tips. Maybe I'll dust off that blog post though. It might be useful.
Sounds like it would be. But I tell my students, if you get stuck on something, walk away for a little bit because your mind won't ever shut off, and you're a walking testament to that, literally. So that's awesome.
Yep. Totally.
Cool. I think we're kind of getting close to time. We really appreciate you being here, Joe. Is there any last plug or shout out, or how can people follow along with you on your journey or Pulumi? Yeah,
so Pulumi.com is your one-stop shop. Just click the little purple button and it will take you through the getting started for open source. And remember, Pulumi is open source, so you can use all this stuff for free. And I always love hearing feedback. So if you ever have feedback, I'm Joe at Pulumi.com. Feel free to get in touch. We're happy to help with anything. and I'm Funk of Joe on Twitter and Blue Sky as well these days. But yeah, any and all feedback helpful. We are very customer centric, so if we can help your team, little else makes us happier. So
I will say your guys' Slack channel is actually really great. I've posted a few questions, and it's not like there's always some tech channels, right, that everybody bashes yours, like, how are you so dumb? Pulumi's was really great. I posted probably a really dumb question, and somebody's like, oh yeah, here's how you do this. And that was really awesome because it was, feels welcoming to newcomers, and, you don't feel like being the dumb person in the room. So I would give a plug for that as well. Join their Slack.
Definitely. And I'm glad you felt that, because I've always felt building Pulumi was as much about building culture as it was technology or product. And I feel like our culture is reflected in our community as well, warm, welcoming. No question is a dumb question. Like we're all learning, and we're learning together. So definitely join the Slack and let's learn some cool stuff together.
For sure. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this episode. Thanks, Joe, for joining us, and we'll see everybody again next week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys.